Everybody's okay? All right. Well, thanks for coming today. I know we're getting closer to the Easter holiday for Orthodox and non-Orthodox alike, which doesn't happen all that often. So that's quite interesting. Why don't we turn to page 44? And again, what I'm going to start with is material on the sections that Jeremy did. And he did very well, and the translation you did was excellent too. But I think spending some extra time on the end of the second meditation will help prepare us for what evidence means for Husserl in the third. So if you look at page 44, it's not just the convertibility of my experience into an object for my consciousness. So our lived experiences can become objects. It is that every perception of this page, as I read it, moves me toward the potential of the next sentence, the next page, the next section. To read is to engage with the potentialities that are set up by the actuality of these words now, as infused with the meaning that is already to come for me. Thus, as I read, and this is on page 44, I, quote, involve potentialities. And these are not, quote, empty possibilities, but rather possibilities intentionally pre-delineated, vorgezeichnete, in respect of content. The experience pre-writes, vorgezeichnet, what is possible for me to recognize along the trajectory that the experience sets up. I am following out what is implicit in these words and sentences. That's what it means to read. Thus, reading is throwing myself into the experience as one who is led along, empowered and structured, limited and given a trajectory by the fact that experience needs me too, that experience is made up of, quote, on 44, possibilities actualizable, verwirklichender, by the ego. So experience is a call and response. The perception I have of the path or the house from the front calls me to continue around, to see the back or the further trail. Each experience is precisely structured as having a horizon. The horizon, Husserl says, changes as the experience progresses. And this shifting, changing horizon is made of, quote, reference, Verweisung. The experience is thoroughly meaning, but it is meaning that connects the activity of my intentional life with the sides or moments of the object I am experiencing. The gift of my cogito is both the subject and object of intentionality. And the gift of its being the preserved and potential object of intentional acts within time consciousness, that gift, is that the cogito, the lived experience as such, can extend across time. Only because the cogito is within time can it intend the same thing across time, across shifts in perspective, adumbrations, etc. There's another piece of 44 now. There is, Husserl says, quote, a continuous protension, which with each phase of the perception has a new sense. Experience is looking ahead, always temporal in its anticipation from and its holding together of what we have just seen or read or walked. It is not just retention and protension, it is the preservation of the subjunctive. And this will be something that I think we should talk about, especially in the fifth meditation, when the other person occurs as if I were there. So subjunctive. I am not just what I am able to intend by means of following out the horizon of this here now. I am also what I could have experienced, should have, as Robert Frost implied, should I have gone down the other path, which was just as fair, but which I left for another day. The preservation of the cogito and the lived experience in internal time consciousness is the preservation of a very subjunctive character of experience, which could always have unfolded differently if I were to have, and this is a quote from Husserl on 44, turned my eyes that way instead of this. Experience then leaves us with its mark. This is what happened. This is what I did. But also with the mark of our own freedom. Experience unfolds by means of our, quote, I can and do, but I can also do otherwise than I am doing. That's on page 45. If we were to hesitate in terms of Husserl's characterization of intentionality and constitution, if we were to be unsure as to which of the two, noesis or noema, predominates, we would be right to hesitate. It is clear here that Husserl emphasizes that experience calls to me, gives me a sketch of itself, limits and directs me, but that also, by means of that direction, my capacity and choice structures the unfolding or uncovering of the meaning of what I intend. The cogitatum as cogitatum, the object as object, Husserl says, and this is also on page 45, quote, is never present to actual consciousness as a finished datum. Hi, Isabel. We're on page 45, section 19. In the German text, what I just read, it's never present to actual consciousness as a finished datum. In the German text, it reads, nie ein fertig gegebenes Vorstellung, or as I translate that, it is never presented as a fully given object. Givenness is not transparent and resistant. Rather, givenness is a partly undisclosed or hidden process of negotiation between subject and object, between the sketch that is pre-written and the possibilities that are open to me to cash it out. This is something he says explicitly, page 45. Givenness, quote, leaves further particulars open. Within experience, then, I follow along the predelineation toward what Husserl calls, quote, fulfilling further determination, and perhaps determination as otherwise, but with new horizons of openness, end quote. We thus do not ever simply intend this thing here. We intend horizons of the thing, of experience, of ourselves. We see and experience relations when we experience things. We never intend simply the object within experience itself either, but rather the experience and our own activity in it as further objects of reflection, of temporal stretching and return. We experience the references to all other aspects of itself within the thing here, and we experience those references as references intimately connected with our own actions and our own temporality. The object is not a finished thing, then, that we encounter, but a, quote, pole of identity, always meant expectantly as having a sense yet to be actualized. That's on the bottom of 45 to 46. As I read this sentence of Husserl's again, I am struck by how both object and subject as poles are really more like actions than nouns. The sense of the object is a pole, but that pole is more like an axis of rotation of the nucleus of an atom than a candy cane that identifies where Santa lives. The object, Husserl notes, quote, this is 46, is an index pointing to a noetic intentionality that pertains to it according to its sense. It's an index pointing. Now, Husserl does not use the word for pointing here. It is an index of the noesis. So the noema, the object, is an index of the noesis to which it belongs. The word belongs is there. Yet there is something correct and helpful about the translator's insertion of the sense of pointing. Intentionality is a pointing. The noesis is directed to the noema and vice versa. The noema, the object of the experience, points back to us as we follow out its predelineated horizon. We intend each other. So here I'm interpreting the activity of the noema. And so let's continue with section 20. Hello, Evan. We're on section 20, just doing some recall in order to move forward. If we follow Husserl from the logical investigations through the ideas, we see that the logic of consciousness, the logical structure of experience, is the most sophisticated logic we could encounter. Other logics are possible by reference back to the transcendental logic of consciousness. We see this here at the beginning of section 20 by means of Husserl's statement that, quote, the analysis of consciousness is totally different from analysis in the usual and natural sense. That's page 46. The whole that is consciousness is not a sum of its parts or data or elements. Rather than wholes and parts being along the lines of a cadaver, for consciousness as a living experience, the whole includes both actualities and potentialities. And the proper analysis is interpretive. That is, quote, an explication or unfolding, page 46. Phenomenology is thus hermeneutics because each act of intending what is meant goes beyond what it has actively in grasp towards, quote, something more. As the translator notes, this means that our act of intending on page 46 is really, quote, intending beyond itself, über sich hinaus meinen. An analysis is thus, quote, an intuitive uncovering, anschaulich Enthüllung. But the analysis as uncovering shows that what is at stake is not simply, on page 47, quote, a naive devotedness to the intentional object purely as such. If that is what is at stake in following out the horizons presented in experience, namely a naive devotedness to the object, there is no room for oneself. There would be only a reception of meaning that, quote, would remain anonymous. So the intertwining of noesis and noema shows that we matter to the unfolding of the sense of the object. It matters who is doing it. Unlike in natural science, where the investigator strives to embody method and to remove themselves from the equation, we see consciousness as the way in which the noetic makes it possible, quote, to have one intentional object and always this definite one continuously meant, end quote. That's 47. The presence of the phenomenologist, the presence of consciousness, is crucial. However we break up the object into a substrate and qualities, wholes, and parts is given by virtue of the fact of this intertwining of subject and object in consciousness as precisely intentional. Any other analysis follows from this prior unity. The reason that phenomenology is the grounding science is that seeing the object as a correlate, as a noematic pole that calls and answers to the noetic pole, allows the phenomenologist to clarify how the object is, quote, related back to the corresponding ego and the ego cogito, of which it is the cogitatum. It's page 47. Phenomenology is not vague in this regard, unlike the natural sciences, which are content with concluding that their insights are, quote, somehow related back to the corresponding ego. Phenomenology looks for the ways in which the modes of ego comportment make understandable the objective affair's simple meantness for the ego. That's page 47. How does the object appear as claiming existence or as having these qualities? How has the ego already allowed it entry into immanence? Intentionality is thus a kind of responsibility for what is implicit in the active perception of something from here, from this side, within this moment. Intentionality is responsibility for that which announces itself as always already also meant. This is a quote on page 48. As intentional, it reaches out beyond, greift sie über hinaus, the isolated subjective process that is to be analyzed. Here we see Husserl now bring the term constitution to the fore. It is an analysis as intuitive uncovering that allows the phenomenologist to make sense of how the object appears as already more than what we have adequately in hand. We uncover, quote, the highly diverse anonymous processes, or Erlebnisse, lived experience. We have passively synthetic experiences, implicit experiences that are already happening. The infant reaches for the breast before it knows itself or its mother or the difference between the two. Rather than anonymity as the key to science, personal responsibility is the key to phenomenology. We do not want to get out of the way of method. We want to be the method of clarification. Only by so doing can we understand how we always already have, quote, page 48, fixed and abiding objective unities. Also, there is not just one method. There are methods with respect to each category or region of objects, tables, other people, nations, etc. This means that the way the object has its horizons within the manner of its appearing matters. The object calls on us to uncover the appropriate way in which to approach its description. This is on page 48. Quote, the horizon structure belonging to every intentionality thus prescribes for phenomenological analysis and description methods, plural, of a totally new kind. These methods are geared towards genuine problems concerning subjective origins. Page 49. Again, the presence of the subject matters. We start then with experience as lived. The object is always already knocking at the door, or even better, already dwelling inside the house. We cannot start with the presupposition that the things in the world exist outside of us as formed and awaiting our gaze and the processing of their data. In the lived experience of the cogito, the object is already calling to us. This is a rather long quote from page 49. The attempt to determine a process of consciousness, Bewusstseinserlebnis, as an identical object on the basis of experience, Erfahrung, in the same fashion as a natural object, would indeed be folly. End quote. The experience as lived, Erlebnis, precedes the experience of grasping, Erfahrung. As Merleau-Ponty would say with respect to our observations of the patient Schneider, grasping precedes pointing. Within intentional life, then, analysis does not break up, does not anonymize what it seeks to study. It rather seeks to bring to light the syntheses already occurring and to personalize the work of the ego. It seeks to bring all the lived experiences and their inclusion of noetic and noematic moments to the fore, such that we can see how the flow of experience as such within that is, quote, an essentially necessary conformity to type, which can be apprehended in strict concepts. It's the end of this at 49. And I have two more sections, 21 and 22. We'll be done with the second meditation and we can stop for discussion. So Husserl closes in section 21 this meditation by first showing that the, quote, most universal type with respect to the intentionality of consciousness is the structure or, quote, schema, that Husserl names ego cogito cogitatum. That's 50. This hyphenated structure governs all experiences of objects, and it indicates the mutual implication of each appearing moment, the I, ego, the act, cogito, and the object, cogitatum. There is no appearing of the one without the other. There is only co-appearing together, a kind of radical community, Gemeinschaft, as he says in Ideas 1. It is this co-appearing that is the, quote, peculiar synthesis of intentionality, page 50. Intentionality, in other words, has a way of combining the object and the subject, and of combining the appearances of the object that is its intentionality's own. The cogitatum is particularized by means of the, quote, intentional object. But insofar as we grasp the intentional object in its manner of appearing, we are also grasping, we are also given, quote, the typical infinite multiplicities of possible cogitationes. That's page 50. So insofar as the object is given, we are also given the infinities of possible lived experience. Please note that the word infinite does not appear in the German text. The object refers to the experiences that are possible because the object serves as, quote, transcendental clue, Leitfaden. So this notion of the object as transcendental clue is, I think, new with Husserl, and it's pretty important as we go forward. The word Leitfaden or clue might be better translated as guide or trace or sketch. The object is not simply its own affair. It serves as a guide to all the acts that take it up. Much like fingerprints on a stolen art object point to the possible person who took it, the object as clue reveals its relationships to the acts that uncover or disclose it. The object as intentional is thus first and foremost an object of consciousness because it shows its threads of involvement within the acts that come to witness it. Or, as Husserl says repeatedly, the object is that which is the same because various and different cogitationes each, quote, bear the intentional object within them, in sich tragen, as the same meant object, page 50. This reference to the multiplicity of possible experiences within which the object is intended as the same is indefinite, possibly infinite. But if so, it is not an infinite that shakes us. For the object as born within an undefined number of possible acts is granted the finitude it claims by way of being born, carried, quote, within the unity of a possible conscious life, Bewusstseinslebens, page 50. Our conscious life is limited in fact, and its infinite possibilities of particular positions or actions take on directedness, choiceful limitation, and selection by means of the intertwining and passage of one experience into the next. For example, I could turn this way to see more of the table, but I have turned that way, and now the moves I can make in the future are not simply infinite, but infinite within a finite delimitation of what it means to live with this table as a piece of furniture in my home, etc., or with a dog sitting on the top of the furniture, as I've noticed. A life may have infinite possibilities of networked acts or moments, but it lives this one and then that one. And as it does this, life cuts off enormous swaths of what was possible. To begin to paint on a canvas is to commit so many future artistic actions to anonymity and inaccessibility. Husserl speaks to this possible infinitude within finitude by emphasizing that even the formal universality of the just any object delivers itself as the same object over to a finite number of particular acts. A consciousness that is always already, quote, subdivided into a number of sharply differentiated particular types. And actually the German is noetisch, noematisch Sondertypen. The true infinitude that the same just any object refers to, this infinite remaining of the same identity, can maintain itself only insofar as we enter into the limited modes of intuition, perception, retention, recollection, expectation. As soon as we allow the object to appear through one mode of intuition rather than another, perception rather than memory, its infinite number of possible references to an infinite number of possible experiences becomes bounded, directed, and closed within a particular life of consciousness. So on page 50, Husserl talks about particularization, Besonderungen, is an essential way in which consciousness maintains the identity of the object while also directing it. In response to the particularization of pure consciousness into modes of intuition, the object responds by allowing these particular modes to bear it within them in their own way. By allowing itself to be taken up within multiple particular modes of intuition, the object, as bestowed identity, thus binds together cogitationes. I particularize myself for the object. It's like we're doing a dance. I'm getting dressed up. I'm particularizing myself. The object holds my particularities as traces of my and of its unity. It pins the corsage on me for the picture. Right? But the object does so while also being bound by the kind of experiences I, in fact, take of it. If I dwell in my, quote, generative constructive activity, erzeugend aufbauenden Ich-Aktivität, then I witness categorial objectivities that can only refer to further active syntheses of mine. I can move from whole to part or from singularity to plurality, but I do this in such a way as to preserve the kind of object that I experience. In geometry, for example, I can move from shape to shape and actively construct dimensional objects that I can never meet with in lived experience. I can experience even purely formal objects, purely formal space. As soon as I leave that generative constructive activity and I return to responding purely to givenness, I have an object that Husserl calls, quote, objectivities that are real, on page 51. These objects also gear into an infinite range of possible experiences and engage with logical moves from wholes to parts. But these moves of mine are ones that are merely responsive to givenness and thus involve, on page 51, quote, passive synthesis. By way of responding to givenness within the experienced world, I am able to have insights that are also categorical and with respect to the engagement with the object's quality, quantity, etc. But these categorical insights are revealed by the object as given and not as constructed. Thus, they are entwined with a different manner of givenness and prescribed and limited to the particular life of particular consciousness that is given to itself as entwined with the object. Whereas geometry can move us, or rather we move ourselves in geometry, from shape to shape without obeying the law of passively encountered givenness, with respect to given objects within the realm of what we might call the natural world, we depend for our infinite possibilities of further experiences of the same object on the, quote, material ontological particularizations, page 51, that appear on the basis of having its qualities, quantity, relationships, etc., given as well. In the case of both kinds of syntheses, so geometry is active and sort of like straightforward perception is passive, the object maintains its identity through the shifts we move through. And this indicates that the object as intentional is born within each connected act of an ongoing experience of it. And that's why this is going to be relevant to evidence. Further, in each case, the object is born within the act because the object carries within it the future possible acts that can open out of this one. The object then, as born within the experience, also bears within itself as transcendental clue, me, the subject. In the case of anything whatever, or in the case of the real object, we see the role of transcendental clue. But in each case, the manner of intending, active or passive, the manner of givenness is different. I give triangles, I construct them by means of axioms. I am given the pyramids of Egypt by way of a historical development of approximation of a geometrical shapes that I passively receive or perceive and take over. Intentionality in each case, whether of triangles or pyramids, whatever type of object, is a flux. We flow from aspect to aspect, from one level to another. And so Husserl says in order to track what is happening, we need to uncover the noetic-noematic relationships. No matter how unlimited in terms of possibility the possible acts of consciousness may be with respect to each intentional object. Nevertheless, this multiplicity is bounded. The very happening of the intentional relation guarantees this, since the way in which modes of consciousness pass into each other are limited. This is on page 51. Quote, they are by no means variable without restriction. So the set of structural types of the consciousness of an object is bounded. We can see this in the relationship of perception to eidetic intuition. So I want to see the essence, let's say, of a table. I can reflectively vary the perceptual experience of this table as having multiple numbers of legs in my imagination, sizes, surface, kinds of touching or tactility, smooth or rough. But I cannot vary the table into complete transparency and absence of compositional material. I can vary towards the essence, table, in other words, but I cannot, in order to see the essence, violate the unity of table in doing so. I cannot deal away with the, quote, evidence of objective identity. That's page 51. The table makes a claim on me as this one, as remaining itself. It provides evidence as an object to which I must answer in my moves of consciousness that it sets up before me, as what I can do by means of its self-presentation, even as I leave it behind for the essence. The establishment, therefore, of, quote, the formally universal constitutional theory of any object whatever, this is page 52, is a possible avenue for research because the types of modes of consciousness are limited and the ways in which the modes interrelate are discoverable and also limited. Nevertheless, the truth is for Husserl that there can only be, quote, the formally universal constitutional theory of any object in such a way as to reveal the multiple regions of objects and the multiple intentional syntheses that maintain their differences. To intend another human being, a society, a thing in its environment, and then an experience of each of these are radically distinct kinds of constitutive projects. The meanings that offer themselves in each case mobilize different aspects of conscious life and different activities or passivities. Even the lived experience itself gets a kind of unique constitutive account. This is on page 53. Quote, all immanent subjective processes, which is lived experience, or Erlebnisse, themselves are likewise clues, since as objects of the consciousness of internal time, they have, singly and universally, their constitution. In the English translation, you'll see on page 53 that the translator puts constitution in quotes, as if they don't really have constitution, the lived experiences, as opposed to the objects. Husserl doesn't put that in quotes. We do, in fact, constitute, I prefer the word recognize, lived experiences on their own terms. We are given and bestow, we both are given and bestow, meaning as centered in lived experiences differently and importantly. Experiences appear as forming themselves and as being formed across our internal time. Lived experiences are made of time, and thus we are participants, because time is what we are, in their synthesis. Yet they are a different kind of object, having no adumbrations, and thus our comportment, our bearing of them within our act of reflection, or within our life, is different from the way the intentional object in the case of the table is within our act of perception. Phenomenology, in other words, is responsive to objects and to experiences of objects, each on their own terms. We are always responding to, quote, problems of particular separately considered kinds of objects by means of these problems of universality. That's page 53. Just as the object and the act bear each other within themselves, hence the agency of the role of transcendental clue for the object. It's holding us in it. Like it literally is holding us in itself. So too does the particularization of the kinds of objects bear within themselves the clue toward the fuller and more accurate appearance of the universality of consciousness. The fact we have different kinds of experiences of the same object allows us to reflect on what we are as a whole that bears all those threads together. The world is a clue. Not only each particular object, also the world is integral to consciousness. The world is born within us, it's immanent to us. And the world bears, this is the thing I'm trying to convince you of, the world bears consciousness in itself and brings consciousness towards itself. Thus, the having of the world as intentional object points toward, this is 53, quote, the synthesis of objective perceptions and other objective intuitions, which extends through the unity of life as a whole. We have a life. We are bound together as living consciousness because the world is meant for us as our intentional object, and because its appearance shows us that it's our job to keep our eyes fixed on the world as always, again and again, in new but continuous, consistent ways, the same world. It is the world that unites us. It's also we who allow the world, quote, page 53, to become thematic as a unity. We are interdependent, we and object, we and world. And thus, to understand the claim to existence or being or separateness that the world or the object demands, we must deal with egology, the study of the ego, with the way in which we are united with ourselves by means of our acts toward those objects. Okay, I'm going to do section 22. That's one page, and then we'll stop for discussion. This is section 22. So objects as clues reveal something further about experience. Not only do objects reveal that their own identity is wrapped up with the way in which they are born within or belong to our conscious acts, objects also reveal how, quote, constituting multiplicities of consciousness belong together for essential reasons. And that's page 53. This whole idea of belonging is very, very important for Husserl, and it may have a lot of importance for the way he talks about the experience of other people. The kinds of objects that are identical within and across various acts of consciousness reveal, the objects in their multiplicity reveal, the fact that conscious acts, quote, are governed by principles, page 53. The object thus guides phenomenology because the manner in which the object appears, quote, points to, bezeichnet, a structure with the transcendental ego that is governed by a rule, page 53. The object retains its power within our consciousness, and we are very glad it does, because for us as phenomenologists, we can continue to show or indicate or sketch out, bezeichnet, an order that we are already following, that we are already enacting by means of our relationship with objects. And that's what I take constitution to be, sort of recognizing the way in which we're already bound up. Phenomenology thus can proceed organically and in an organized fashion while responding to the appearance of objects, because the object itself shows that, quote, transcendental subjectivity is not a chaos of intentional processes. So that's the job of the object, to show that we are not chaotic. It is this action of belonging together, object and subject, subjective act or lived experience with other subjective acts or lived experiences, that indicates the ability we have to map consciousness as the structure of ego cogito cogitatum. We map belonging, and we do so while experiencing that belonging from within. As the ego, we exist and we discover ourselves to exist as, quote, a universal constitutive synthesis. That's page 54. We are the motor of internal belonging, of bearing within us the object. of the object bearing within itself as clue our actions and possibilities, our past and future being broken open toward the objects as such. We are, in fact, this is page 54, our own, quote, mobile clue, beweglichen Leitfaden. You might say moving clue. We are the system in which the object and the subject belong together. We are the capacity to receive, to bear the object as the clue of our acts. We are the capacity to receive the order of our operations from the very taking up of the object as clue. We are the pairing of identities, thing and us, such that our project of phenomenology can be guaranteed in advance as systematic and yet also as self-discovering that systematicity as we respond to the modes of givenness in which we both construct and respond to what appears. Phenomenology, thus, is, quote, an infinite regulative idea. That's page 54. But it is one that is given in advance as rooted in the given and in the call and response of object and act. The whole of consciousness in its relation to world is, this is page 54, quote, an anticipative idea, not, however, an invention or an as if. Husserl, by the way, does not say anticipative idea, but rather an idea that operates within and by means of anticipation. Perhaps that's a fine distinction, but the idea anticipates in a way that is more solid than a simple subjunctive, an as if. The idea of the whole of consciousness being laid out and clarified in its structure is something we live in and toward, something we fill in as we go. It is not simply ideal in an empty sense. We can only pursue the whole by means of the parts, even though it is given already as an infinite idea and as a system. We must pursue, quote, single types of objects as restricted clues, page 55, while we also have an eye toward the whole of consciousness or egology as such. It's that whole givenness, but being restricted to doing one thing at a time, that means that we are hermeneuticists. We're not scientists in the natural scientific route. We are always moving from the whole to the parts and from the parts back to the whole. And we're that for reasons of a priori structure. Okay, so that's the end of what I have on the second meditation. I can tell that you much prefer other people interrupting and saying better things, which is great. And we'll do that now with your questions and thoughts, but also I'll read two more sections and then Olga will go. So do you have any thoughts or questions or comments? I see from Christos in the chat, I really like some of the description that time is what we are. It makes me think also of the phrase, no present like the time. I wonder, can you say something more about intentional flux? Is this flux suggested to be more in consciousness or more in the object? And how does this relate to the ordering principle? Is this ego or ecological? Also, is the ideal necessarily empty or possibly also multidimensional, more saturated than experienced reality? Um, so a lot of really helpful questions, and I'm not sure that I am going to have an ability to do this justice right away. So I've read it. Hopefully you've read it. Does anyone want to answer Christos before I attempt anything? All right. Well, I will say that I think you're right to ask. Oh, Marvin, were you going to say something?
Well, just uh, maybe not that helpful, but general thing that the question says, is it is the flux more in consciousness or more in the object? I don't, my sense of this material is that Husserl's exploring both and their interdependency. So um, I guess I don't perceive Husserl as taking one side more than the other, except to say that the naive approach is giving far too much weight on the object. But I'm interested what other people say too.
I like what you said, Marvin, and I would agree. I think we, in some sense, the way Husserl is often read is that we have internal time consciousness, and time is sort of what we are, and that's what we bring to the table, as it were, to intentional experience. The objects, however, are given what we just looked at the end of the second meditation. The objects are what's tying us together. And so having our life, which is the way in which we experience our own internal temporality, having our life is also in part the activity, if you will, of the object, preserving the unity of all the possible and previous acts of consciousness with respect to this thing. So, in a way, the object's temporality, the object remaining what it is through time, is a participant in our own remaining the same through time, in our own development of a life. So I think that's absolutely true. Um, I think, however, what I would say with Christos at the end is that it is more saturated than we normally take experience to be. I think Husserl is saying that. Um, the saturation is what drives forward phenomenology. There is already the meaning uh, that we discover, and we discover it as already being valid. Um, Muhammad.
Thank you so much for this very elaborated discussion. So I just had a question, and it was funny because Julia had a dog in her background, and the dog was also hearing everything that was said. And we're talking about the givenness of the object, or let's say the speaker in this case. How does that how does that fit in? If it's especially this givenness is coming from the object in sort of the consciousness of the dog, how does that like I don't know, how does that play? What do you think happens in there? Is it and then it goes back to this intertwinedness as well too.
Are you asking about the way in, what are you asking again about the
So I
dog?
guess I'm saying if there is this intertwinedness, we're saying that there's givenness, there's something about the object, there's something about the subject, there's this intertwinedness, and the dog is a recipient. It does also have some form of a consciousness or maybe some form of an ego. And if the object is taking a part in order for this to arrive, for this to happen, what happens for the dog? What is it that the dog is missing that cannot conceive all of the other stuff, cannot really sort of engage in this conversation, even though it's able to observe and even though perhaps the givenness of the object is there as well too. And the dog does have consciousness and dog has an awareness and it does react to certain things. So what is it that is missing that I guess you have it in the human being, but it's missing in that dog in terms of Husserl formalism?
Anyone want to try to answer Muhammad before I do?
Well, um, I would uh, just I'm a little confused by your question, so maybe clarifying. It's the the narrow way of understanding your question is why can't the dog understand this conversation? I'd say the narrow answer is because presumably the dog doesn't understand all the advanced words of English. Like maybe the dog understands food and get or something, but not all these words. And the same would be true for a human being who doesn't know English at all. They would listen to our conversation, goes blah 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 blah. So that's like a very narrow interpretation of your question. But I think
Perhaps maybe the other thing, maybe, I mean, that was a very good follow-up you asked, is that is the limitation, because right now we're having the object and the givenness of an object is such an essential point here. The givenness of the object with respect to a dog or a person hasn't changed.
wait.
Sure.
The givenness, I understand Husserl as saying that the givenness appears in the context of each individual consciousness. So yes, the dog would actually, presuming the dog is conscious for sake of discussion here, the dog is hearing sounds, but the givenness of those sounds are different than the givenness that's presented to us. So maybe uh, I think we have limited capacity to understand. So sometimes we hear words and it doesn't fully register. So I'll notate that category of things as blah. Like maybe we can go back and unpack blah, but there's a certain amount of blah blah, and then ego, consciousness, interrelation. Some phrase flashes forward, and then okay, that's important. I would suggest maybe in the dog's consciousness, it's like blah, 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 blah. Then when I said food, it goes, hmm? Because it registers something givenness about that sound that's different than the other sounds. But I don't know, Peter or other people.
Well, I think Jeremy had his hand up. Jeremy, is this along this line? Are you starting a new thing?
No, it's responding.
Okay.
And I think at first I didn't get what Mohammed's point, but I thought about it, and I think I see the sense in which, in terms of what we can directly see, yes, or hear through our senses, in a sense, there's no difference between what a dog sees and hears and what we see and hear. So the question really is, what language? And so it doesn't hear sounds as language the way we do. Same thing is true if you don't know a language, in a foreign language, for come to think of it. So that's a really interesting question. What is the nature of the givenness of meanings that signs point to? And I think I'm not sure Husserl really, how shall I put it? I think it's a really good topic to pursue, the question of how would Husserl answer that question. I'm not sure that's something that he ever answers adequately, although I could be wrong. But I think that's the issue. What is that kind of givenness? And that is not simply the same kind of givenness as what is directly given to us to our senses. And that is a very important question that's kind of puzzling, because it's, in a sense, absent. It's referring to what is not given. And in fact, in perception is full of that. We don't just have things that are absolutely present. Even when we see things, we wouldn't be seeing the objects we see if not, in some sense, the backside of the object were not, in a sense, also given. And that's the whole point of the horizon. That's the whole point of these infinite possibilities. How are they given? And yet, the very givenness of what is directly given wouldn't be what it is were it not for that. So, this kind of does, I just wanted to mention, my other thought was, what about getting to the whole idea of, even in the perception of the simplest perception of a single visible object, it essentially involves a horizon of what is not directly given. But Husserl also says the object is selbst da. It is present. It is there. Now, that presence we start out with is not something potential. So my question is, what is the presence of the object as pole of identity? And what, in other words, as maybe that's what we mean by Leitfaden, as that unity, the unity is built up, yes, but the unity isn't the unity also presupposed by all of the many perspectives. I kind of said more than I planned, but this is actually a really interesting question. Yeah, it's a Leitfaden misleading to, anyway.
Miyuki, go ahead.
Yeah, I think I was thinking quite similar to what Jeremy was just saying, but I feel like if you think of the dog as having is in the natural attitude, so the world has a sort of concordance and unity, then I think for the dog as well, there is a world, but the difference is he's not in the phenomenological attitude, so he's not tracing back the essences. And so in that sense, like he's not seeing the Leitfaden and he's not tracing back where these essences come from. And so I think the world itself is very concordant, it's in order, but he's not concerned with like what's the possibility for such experience to take place, what's the possibility for us to have meaning within our experience. And so I think like the big difference is tracing back this Leitfaden and to establish the foundation for like the meaning of our experience is how I would understand it.
I think that's right. There's a lot of really helpful things. But before I say anything else, does anyone else want to jump in?
Ju- just one sentence, kind of in response to Jeremy. I think Husserl, I don't know the answers to your questions, but my sense is Husserl puts a lot of emphasis on this synthesis idea. So the synthesis might be the key to understanding uh, how we can have givenness of a non-substantial thing. Basically, I translate synthesis as what people nowadays call something like subconscious processes or neurological conditioned, uh, perhaps culturally conditioned things of seeing certain abstract categories that, small children or people in other cultures might not even agree that those abstract things are really there. So how can they be given?
So I'll say just a couple things. I think all of you are doing great. Isabel, I know this is your first time, and I'm not cold calling on you, but I'm inviting you to say something if you would like, or you can wait if you want.
Um, yeah, well, I guess I really appreciated the question of discerning between, I feel like the dog and humans. I feel like that made sense to me as a question and really understanding how as human beings we are conscious and what Miyuki said about being in the phenomenological attitude, I think makes sense. So I guess that's all I would have to share right now.
Breaking
Thank
the ice is always good.
you.
Um, so just in terms of the meditations themselves, Husserl will talk about animals in the fifth meditation as being able to sustain levels of pairing with us. That is, every consciousness, every living being can sustain levels of pairing with us by which we know that meaning is operative for them in their own lives, right? So we and the dog can both see the same things and realize that we are both seeing the same things in a positive or even challenging or jealous way, right? So we have confirmation, in other words, of the intentional structure of the dog in the way the dog's behavior calls or implicates our own internally, not that we have to piece it together, but that internally it happens that way. So I blame myself, really, Julia, for your dog leaving, because clearly he just got bored. And that was clear. Like, your dog was interested in getting your attention, right? Interested in being very close to you. You could see the whole world of the dog, right? And decided to sit there and then listen to Peter drone on and on. He's like, "Yeah, dude, I'm out of here. Later, Julia. I wanted to hang around, but not for this," right? So there's something, and that is a little bit of a joke, but the dog's consciousness is absolutely visible. I think, Jeremy, your point is that the object, in a way, is already present, such that it does not uh, allow of degree, right? The object, as such, in the character of world, let's say, in the totality of world, is already within consciousness as pointing outward. And that's what allows the ecstatic temporality of Dasein, or of the human being, to be bound up with the world. So the world already serving as this pole, or the object in general, or anything, whatever, serving as this pole. I think you're absolutely right. It's not mid-degree, but you're also right, Jeremy and Marvin, in that the way that the dog is given our conversation is different from the way we are given. And Miyuki was right that the dog does see order. The dog, and we know this because when dogs or cats or pets of any kind are abused or disrupted or ignored, we can see them suffer. We see them aware of the fact that a previously organized world, or a world that should be organized, is no longer organized, right? That's what emotions mean. Emotions mean the recognition of a life as well ordered and rational, or a life as not well ordered and not rational. So it's very difficult to pinpoint at what level a child or a dog or a person with Alzheimer's or anything like that. It's very difficult to pinpoint where they are, because intentionality is within, as Jeremy is saying, the object is without degree. And if we're talking about intentionality as having degrees, then what are we going to do? I think that's one part. Sally also said the infinite nature of possibilities is, yes, it's like the object's contribution, I guess, Sally. It's the holding together and the marking out of the differences between the infinite number of possible acts of taking up that same object. And I'll get to Julia and Evan just one second. But just remember, this is the second meditation. It is meant to call us back to Descartes' synthesis of the wax in his own second meditation. And there the insight was, as you recall, that it is the mind that brings identity to changing objects on its own, right? It's the divorce of the wax from consciousness, and it's the mind that lays down the tracks of identity on which the changes of the wax, as it gets closer to the fire, happens. Here, it's very different. The identity of the object and the identity of the subject, as Marvin said, are intertwined. You cannot have the ego's identity without being preserved and called for by the object. You cannot have the object's identity without being preserved and called for by the subject. And so this is very hard, because even in Husserl scholarship, and even when you read the Cartesian meditations, like I'm putting it out there as this, you know, interpretation that makes sense. And Husserl seems to imply that the ego is without needing the world, or could exist, outside of the world, or whatever. I think he has to mean here that there is no one without the other. And I'm just mentioning that just to give you the sense of why all of you are correct, right? So there is no degree of the pole of the object and the pole of the subject. I think structurally Jeremy is right. On the other hand, in terms of the givenness that opens up in varying dimensions, there are degrees to which we can understand conversations. And the dog and the child and the non-phenomenologist, right? They're all of different degrees of being sensitive and acting on the givenness of these situations. Okay, Julia, sorry to speak so long.
Yeah, about the dog. course, it made me think of Plato. Your dog is a true philosopher, and or it's in the Republic. The idea is that because the dog can recognize who is familiar and who is not, they have a at least practical sense of distinguishing what is familiar or like themselves. And so I don't know how my experience the world is any different. Like when if I'm walking in the woods or walking in a city, like the second I get to somewhere that's familiar, my experience of it changes. What matters, like I'm no longer able to tell the particulars and the details of where I am as much as I'm able to tell that I know where I am, that there's a practical benefit of what I know about this place. And so does the dog. They know what is going to help them get what they want or understand where they are, just like us. And so I don't, yeah, I'm curious, like how much more sophisticated is our understanding than the dog. And yeah, I think that's about it. I guess maybe does the dog do pairing? I don't know. That's maybe a higher level of phenomenological reflection. Maybe he can do.
Evan.
Yes, I've recently been thinking phenomenology and music quite a bit, both thinking about tones and also just aesthetics and music. I've been reading through Andy Hamilton's Aesthetics and Music, aproposly named. And I think that is a place that I've located maybe some help, particularly because Husserl does talk a lot, both about mathematics, but also about music. And going back to Pythagoras, that's not a terrible that's not a terrible suggestion. But the idea of something within the phenomenological attitude notes that I can think an E flat in my head, or I can think about Beethoven's Ode to Joy, and I'm thinking those notes. They exist as objects within my consciousness, and they exist in tones out there. And it would make total illogical sense to say that they only exist in my head, because obviously they don't. It's Beethoven's Ode to Joy that's out there, and in fact, the transcendental clue in some ways I think is that it exists in both of those. And I'm not talking, and there's arguable, but I think somewhat to Husserl's theory there is that if those tones ceased to have their acoustic feature or function within the outside world, it would cease to be Beethoven's Ode to Joy. And if it ceased to be that I could think in my brain about the shape of those notes as they move up and down and their relationship to one another, it wouldn't be the Ode to Joy. And a dog or a parrot or any higher being may hop up and down. If you have a parakeet, you know they'll hop up and down to some happy music there, but they're not conceptualizing within their consciousness that relationship of tonality. They're recognizing it as noise and even pleasant noise. I mean, there are pleasant noises like I like the dinner bell ringing too. Like I'm with the dog on that one. That's a lovely sound, but it's not music. It's not tonality in the sense that we as human beings experience within our consciousness that, again, cannot be divorced from reality. And so thinking about the pairing description between the dog and the human and what is this relationship between cogito um, I found that to be really helpful. And he's using some phenomenological methodology. So it's a little bit of a left turn, but not as much as you might think. So yeah.
Okay. Is it all right to continue into the third meditation? Does anyone else want to say anything before we do? All right. So I'll say the first two sections or present to you the first two sections. There's going to be an example of something that really happened to me, which was being, I was not involved in the car accident that I'm going to describe, but it was pretty horrific and lots of people were involved. So I'm just letting you know that there's an example about a car accident coming up so that you might wonder why. Hopefully, I will show you in a way that makes it um, meaningful. Again, what's at stake in the third meditation now is evidence, truth, or actuality. Remember that in Descartes' third meditation, this is where he talks about the idea of God, the idea of the infinite as being necessarily already in us, put there by the actual infinite, because the infinite idea has, by Isabel, the infinite idea has infinite content, and I could not have made that. So, for whatever we're going to talk about, evidence, Descartes' focus is on allowing us to see that all truth has its root in one main idea that we have, namely the idea of the infinite, which on its own gets us out from ourselves and into a world by virtue of that idea having to correspond to an actual infinite that is not us. This will not be Husserl's journey, but the same notion of truth and actuality, and whether it comes from within or not, is what we're going to be thinking about. So, this is section 23. Husserl now talks about differentiating the phenomenological description of the intentional object in relation to the act that takes it up. He intends to offer, page 56, quote, a more pregnant concept of constitution. If we remember the course of the first volume of Ideas by Husserl, we recall that after expressing the noetic-noematic constitution, Husserl turns to modes of belief as what we need to unpack within the experience we have of objects. Here, too, it seems that we need to differentiate how the way in which the object calls for us to take up its claims to being or non-being, possibility or impossibility, is part of the whole intentional network. Even within the epoche and the reduction, we see the object making claims. And we can reflectively differentiate our modes of belief that are called up. We still do not participate in them as before, but we see them. Hence, Husserl talks about turning our attention to our, quote, this is 56, reason and unreason as correlative titles for being and non-being. There's a correlation of object and act, but there's also a correlation between the mode of act, reason, and the mode of appearance, being. The objective sense of what we mean, this is on page 56, has, quote, the predicates being and non-being embedded within it. The way we are meaning or intending has embedded within it the predicates truth and falsity. There is thus a further dance or conversation, if you will, between the intentional act and the intentional object. It is because the thing appears as some modal variant of being or non-being, as having that character within itself, that the way we intend the thing as either true or false comes to the fore. Truth is not an issue in a vacuum. It is an issue of responsiveness to how the object calls to us. A car accident happens in front of us. Someone on a bike has ended up on his back in the middle of the street in a four-way intersection. It was a pretty bad accident. Everyone stops. From each direction, people rush out to help. I don't know, my Boy Scout training kicked in and I got a blanket out of the car and put it over him. Somebody else stops traffic. Somebody else attends to the young woman who hit this young man because she didn't see him. And literally right out, we have a green light, right out from nowhere. There is a certain flow to what happens, to the address of the situation because of the way it occurred, the way it presented itself. No one stopped to ask if this was true. The event, the injuries, the people announce themselves as really, truly there, and we all respond as if moved already by the scene, as already implicated in one another. Our immediate and interconnected true responses are called for by the being, announced by the way in which the event appears. Now, Husserl might take some issue with how I've just described this. For as he says, quote, these predicates, being and non-being, are not, this is on page 56, not given ipso facto as phenomenological data when the subjective meaning processes, lived experiences, or correlatively the meant objects as meant are given. So he might take issue with what I've just said. However, I would argue that being and non-being, truth and falsity, are not given as predicates, at least not of only one or the other. They are not a quality of the object or the act. They are rather the manner in which the thing and the act are given together. This distinction between predication and manner of givenness is, I take it, why Husserl then says immediately after that, quote, yet they have their phenomenological origin. This is page 56. To apprehend and respond immediately and fluidly to a situation that announces itself as real is to have already attended to the verifiable character of what presents itself. It is to stop the car, to be on the way toward the suffering. Truth and being then are what present themselves as, quote, multiplicities of modes of consciousness that belong together synthetically. I see the accident, I hear the crush of the bike, the muffled screams, etc. I see the other cars stop as I do. I see us all move in fluid, regular approach from our four different directions. And by the way, the miracle of this situation was that we didn't talk to one another. Like everybody literally just took on a role and it all connected. Some people were stopping traffic. Some people, like it was just like this was meant to happen. Everyone is, without talking, is addressing whatever they can do. Um, let me see. What is happening here is that I and others are performing synthetic, multiple acts of verification of our initial perceptions as we move. We are holding the self-given being of the event within our steps as we move. We are doing complicated epistemological syntheses as we walk or run, etc. Husserl mentions, quote, this is 56, those syntheses that, with regard to the initial intending, have the typical style of verifying, and in particular, evidently verifying syntheses. So I would say that continuing to perceive and walking or running towards is a mode of synthesis, to go back to Marvin's point. These syntheses we might call reason. This following up on the claimed being or existence of the event and our intending it as true and as calling for ethical response, this is not outside of intuition. This is within the kind of perception we are now having. We have a perception of the accident as an ethical perception, as a true perception, as our gathering together what we are perceiving within the stance of ethical action. Our approach and care says to the man on the bike and the woman in the car, says to all those who are now stopped at the intersection, that we are only responding, this is page 57, because, quote, the meant object has correlatively the evident character existing. Ethics in this case is not the application of a categorical imperative, because we're talking about reason, but the ongoing rational synthesis of the relation between subject and object within intuition or perception itself. As Husserl says, quote, reason is not an accidental de facto ability, but rather a title for an all-embracing, essentially necessary structural form belonging to all transcendental subjectivity. That's 57. To perceive is also to be able to rationally synthesize the manner of appearance of the object as being or non-being within our power to verify. to take up the claim to existence within our perception as the call to see the object within a certain life or light. When we all exited our cars and attended to the various tasks, including directing traffic, we were transcendental intersubjectivity. Each of us acted on the same synthesis of verification within the same perception of the claim to existence of the event, just from literally different viewpoints, different directions. We took different responsibilities, but without talking, we all knew that we all perceived the seriousness of this existing situation together. This is reason, neither mine nor yours, but ours by virtue of a layer of transcendental subjectivity that generates or combines our perception of this here and now as essential, categorical, etc. We are, in our moving towards the situation and addressing it in the way people ought to address it, referring our actions, quote, to possibilities of verification. To stop the traffic is to act in such a way as to bring others into the ongoing process of verification. It is to make evident what is happening. Reason is thus not an attempt to be dispassionate or to import an order that reality does not itself support. Reason is the way in which perception indicates already what one ought to do by way of making evident the manner of givenness of what appears. So now I'm going to do section 24. It's going to be very short. So then hopefully Olga will be back and ready to go. Otherwise, I have stuff. I can say stuff, and you can all say stuff, but she's showing up twice on the screen and not once on the screen. All right, there you are. Okay, so 24. It's going to be like 2 minutes, hopefully. Evidence emanates from the object in its manners of givenness. My position to address this as serious receives verification, which I seek out by means of how the object gives itself. The thing I am looking for, the way in which to approach the thing or the event, is the thing that gives itself to me in its, and this is a quote from 57, self-appearance, Selbsterscheinung, self-exhibiting, sich selbst darstellens, the self-giving, sich selbst gebens, in the final mode, itself there, selbst da. That's one of these sentences where like Husserl is so focused on the self-giving thing, like he's named 4 different ways in which evidence is evident in the thing, right? And it's in the thing's activity. Appearing, exhibiting, giving, and being there. So evidence is rooted in the way the thing gives itself. To have something in evidence, to have it as verifiable in its claim to being, is to be within the possibility of, quote, being with it itself, viewing, seeing, having insight into it itself, end quote. Experience, Erfahrung, is thus evidence. Experience is evidence. Now, perhaps we are not concerned to verify the manner of a thing's givenness. We may not need to make clear to ourselves the synthesis of verification is correlated with the manner of the thing's givenness. Nevertheless, evidence is always possible. This is on 58. Quote, any consciousness without exception either is itself already characterized as evidence, that is, as giving its object originality, or else has an essential tendency toward conversion into giving of its object originality. That's 58. So here, there are some of you who know German better than me. Probably Miyuki is one of them. So you can, and Jeremy knows it really well too. Feel free to, help me on this part. But I read the German on this thing which says, the consciousness gives its object originality, and I'm convinced that's not what he says. The German for giving its object originality is das ist hinsichtlich seines intentionalen Gegenstandes in selbstgebend, which I interpret to mean that not that consciousness gives its object originally, but that rather it is a consciousness in which the object gives itself originally. Why does that matter? It matters because the agency has to be, for me, as I read Husserl, between subject and object. That evidence is the way in which the intertwining happens. We approach the object in the mode of truth and evidence because the object has already announced itself to us as giving itself to us in person, as quote unquote being. We see this important revision in light of what Husserl talks about as non-being. The non-being we witness, quote, is only a modality of simple being. That's 58. It is the object announcing itself as no longer, or never really, having given itself to us in the capacity of being verified or verifiable. All right. Olga, are you ready to go? All right. Thank you.
So, can you hear me without resonance?
There's a big echo, unfortunately.
I was afraid of. Okay. Okay. I was hoping to bring on screen the marked version of the text, but it seems that I cannot reach that version, unfortunately. So I will bring up the unmarked version. And as I'm doing so, I want to thank Peter for this extensive and very useful analysis, which brings out all the richness of Husserl's approach to consciousness. But following this analysis, I would like to do something else and bring up on screen, which I already did, the table of contents for Cartesian meditations, and thus for us to take a look at the overarching logic of Husserl's argument. I'm suggesting this because I think it will be helpful for us to see how Husserl places the analysis of self-evidential or apodictic appearance of the object in context of this general argument. And transcendental ego is, of course, that structure, that principle, which allows the object to be given to us on one hand, and on the other hand, allows our analysis to go through the steps suggested by Husserl through his table of contents. So second meditation, which Peter worked on a lot today, lays bare the field of transcendental experience, which is the whole of our phenomenal field, everything which can appear and is appearing in our consciousness. But then he says that the field of transcendental experience laid open in respect to its universal structures. So that theme of ordering that Peter touched upon is like a second tone, a very important theme, which in this symphony of Husserl's exposition constantly gives us the background of this universal structuring. And I find it very interesting because given that it's all happening within the transcendental ego's domain, which means this intertwining of subject and object, the inseparability of us and the world. This is happening in conformity, he says, with the universal laws of structure. And what this means, the universal laws of structure, is that structure pertains not only to consciousness in the form of intentionality, but it also pertains to the givenness of the world. And so I find that I find it very interesting that from the very beginning, while he is opening this transcendental experience to analysis, he already has this supposition, which he proves again and again and again, and unpacks in different ways through his analysis, that there is a conformity between the structure of consciousness, not only intentional structure, and maybe even not as much the intentional structure, but the structure of knowledge which correlates to the structure of the actual being. So the world is predisposed to be perceived in its structural aspect, and consciousness captures or reflects or evidentially gives us this structure. And at the very end of third meditation, which comes next after the second meditation, Husserl gives us this section 29 on page 62, which now I'm showing on screen in the table of contents, where he says material and formal ontological regions as indexes pointing to transcendental systems of evidence. So this is the structure that he suggests is universal, and it's given to us as a structure of our knowledge, as a structure or the structure of sciences, and it has both material, which is realistically existing and reflected as such in consciousness, and then formal, which basically will correlate in some way to material and in some way will be represented by themselves, ontological regions. They're indexical in two ways. On one side, as the rosters of this material and ontological region, but on the other hand, they are also pointing to transcendental system of evidence. And what is it? This is exactly what Peter was talking about so eloquently, about the strive of the pointing out to the strive of this transcendental ego to give us the evidential picture of the world, to work within its task of correlation. And so as we see this internal logical connection within Husserl's presentation, we can now look at this title of the third meditation, Constitutional Problems, Truth and Actuality. And again, so this topic, this theme, exists within the containment of his idea of conformity of our knowledge to the universal structures of the world. and then our capacity to form this transcendental understanding of material and formal ontological regions, which are reflected in sciences, through the transcendental system of evidence. And so this third meditation, which deals with constitutional problems of truth and actuality, looks exactly at how we are coming up with this transcendental system of evidence. We could have been in a different position. We could have been in the situation where we're trying to get some knowledge going, just simply to survive as a species. And we would have been coming up with all kinds of fantasies and ideas and suppositions, because we can do that. But this picture would be hanging in isolation from the existence or being of the actual world. But this is not the case. The knowledge that we have corresponds to the state of affairs out there, which is independent of the mind. And the connection, the correlation is happening through us being able to build up this transcendental system of evidence. So now the question is, what is evidence? Again, that was already touched upon by Husserl and by us following him in the first meditation, where he lays the way to the transcendental ego. And he spoke in that meditation a lot about apodicticity, or self-evidential givenness. So this self-evidential presence of things in our mind, the idea of it goes back to Aristotle, but Husserl gives it its own and very specific constitutive sense. If in Aristotle this self-evidentiality refers to modes of givenness of two aspects of knowledge, one of them is the logical connectedness between our judgments and the logical connections within the inferences that we make, our capacity of making judgments, our capacity to define what is what and what are the connections between things. The presentation of things themselves, and then the consequent judgments that we make out of those presentations, they are both given apodictically, self-evidently. So Husserl brings to it a completely new, interesting meaning, looking at our capacity to constitute this both self-evidential presentations of things, and also the connections between them, which is sort of like logical concatenations, which go as a flow through our system of experience, constantly producing sense of the world, sense of our connection with other people, allowing us to understand not just things, but situations, to understand otherness. And at the end of this third meditation, which deals with constitutional problems of this kind, he basically outlines the whole program of analysis which lies in front of us with regard to these problems of logical connection, the problems of reason. So now I'm going to scroll to chapter 62 and take a look at what this program will be. And then in the manner of backing up, we'll go through the sections if we have time. Let's see. 62. 59, 46. Here we are on the third meditation and coming to page 62, where he, actually 62 may be further down. Yeah, it is actually the end of 64. So, just a second, please. Material and formal ontological reasons. Okay, the end of page 63. He says, there is need for a constitutional theory of physical nature, which is given as always existing, and in being so given, is likewise always presupposed. So what's here? What does he mean? He refers to the way we perceive physical nature. We posit it as always existing. That's the way it is given to us, as posited, as always existing. And it's also presupposed this way. So we put forth this anticipation for more of this realistically posited nature to come in. But within this, he says, we need a constitutional theory of physical nature, because just to say, as I understand it, to say these general things is not enough. Not to just give these general constitutive structures, but we need to particularize this givenness as separate sciences. And then we need a constitutional theory of man, of human community, of culture, and so forth. And so the means by which we come to know all these entities will be exactly the synthesis of evidentiality, synthesis of the kind that allow for the evidential verifications of things. So the type of synthesis which allows us to say this is absolutely true. This is true because it's given as a true. And that for me is a great optimism in Husserl's phenomenology, because it shows us and proves very systematically and over the course of long stretches of text that we are not locked up in the space of illusion, and we are not inhabiting the solipsistic bubbles, but we live in an engaged and true manner through the vast expanses of realistically minded, realistically conceived in our understanding universe. In other words, that the picture of the world that we have is true and it's actual in a sense of its verifiable givenness to us by means of our consciousness. So our consciousness is a good tool of knowledge. And so in this approach, he actually overcomes Descartes' reliance on benign God. Well, maybe there is benign God, benign deity behind the picture, but the order of things is such that we are enabled with reliable tools of knowledge and can do very well with these tools. So now looking at the actual sections here, I'll just highlight one of them, looking at the time already. This is the section which is section 24, and maybe even earlier, because I believe, Peter, you covered 23 and 24, right? Yeah. So let's see, 25. Here he comes about to speak about actuality and quasi-actuality. So he places fantasy or as if actuality within the sphere of consciousness, and also within the sphere of being, correlatively, he says. And why is it important? I want to speculate a little bit about it. So the very evident conclusion will be that this is related to our capacity to tap into the real world and get the real picture of the world, so that we are not deluded by what we have in consciousness. But then on the other hand, it's also, he talks about fantasy as if actuality. So this is a very important tool in philosophical investigations in general, because we do a lot of our research by using as if as means of running through various imaginal variations of things and coming to conclusions whether this or that course of events or state of affairs or presence of an object is thinkable, whether our thinking process sustains coherence when we do this as if modifications. So Husserl works with this mechanism in order to establish access to the truly existent or irreal, but at the same time actual, being there, structures of consciousness. So this is his method of feigning or imaginal variations. And so he talks about these different modes, contrasts them, and then speaks about positionality or those of quasi-positionality of the as if of fantasizing. He says admittedly too ambiguous in expression, but then he moves on to the important point of what we often call clarification. This is a mode of making evident, coming from vague and ambiguous judgment to the judgments which are certain, and this comes through the course of this synthetic verifications, which also charts a transition from unclear to clear by this prefigurative intuition, the intuition of logical inference as well as anticipation of a certain presentation. So I find it pretty amazing how he really covers all the ground of all possible objections. And given that this is intentional analysis, meaning that it's a reflection on actual consciousness means it has experiential component, which is always present, as Peter rightly said, in Husserl. It's also an astounding evidence of the degree of presence or differentiation that he had in his own mind in terms of his ability of phenomenological reflection capturing the structures of consciousness. So I'd like to stop now and give us maybe a couple more minutes of discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Olga. Do you mind stopping sharing so we can see each other bigger? I don't, at least I have problems there. I can see everybody.
Yeah.
Um, Marvin.
Thank you. That was really wonderful. uh, in the introduction, you said, if I remember, in your introduction to it, you referred to something like that reason is how you connect all the phases of induction. Is that correct? Is that what you?
I think that that's the inferential activity which goes can be characterized as presence of reason, which is ongoing in our mind. One of it is, so to say, top-down, vertical, building up the judgments about things of the world. But the other is temporal anticipation and grasping consequences, antecedents, when
Mhm.
we progress from, okay, well, if there is, for example, if there is smoke, there is fire.
Right.
That's not only capturing the actuality of the smoke now, but inferring over, making an inference going.
Right. All experiences of smoke in the past and
What
received wisdom of this saying and so on.
also the giving, building up the logic of our.
Yeah. So yeah. So, um, yeah. So my question, I guess, is like connecting it to the term clarification at the end. Is clarification then this process of the uh, reasoning? It's interesting use of the word reasoning because to me reasoning sounds like really fully in consciousness, but my sense is like these synthesis things are usually not very much in consciousness, but that maybe you can kind of work at it through the phenomenological reduction and make more of those processes conscious, but they're like Peter's example of the accident. I don't know if people were racing to do these things while being fully aware of their reasoning of the existence of the situation and so on. It's
Well,
um,
I think that there are different modes of clarification, but
uh,
what he means, I think, by it is the process of explication of something which was only vaguely or intuitively grasped before, and then, as we attract attention to it and begin reflection, which goes within the frame of reference to all the structures that we know already exist in consciousness. So we have some frame toolbox to work with this reflection. We start teasing out the aspects of meaning which were previously packed into something which was intuitively grasped. And I'm basing this interpretation on ideas one, on things that he says.
mhm.
GS1 because he addresses it on a number of occasions. So just to give a concrete example, well, before I give a concrete example, just a few more words. Our intuition is very quick, and all this synthesis,
Right.
passive synthesis, the synthesis of verification, they happen pre-consciously. They are not unconscious. He means a different thing, Husserl, by unconscious, but they are either very fast or happen many times over the course of time and somehow accumulate the results of the synthesis. But he talks about them as pre-conscious, means they are there and they can be brought to visibility if they or brought out to anonymity. That's another term. If we targetedly start reflecting on them and analyzing them and teasing them from underneath this very fast informational function of intuition. So it's like packages of information which can be parsed into modalities and components and elements and then made visible. And that's clarification.
Okay. So it can always be a reflective process.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, everyone, I have to go. I'm happy for people to keep talking. And as I put it in the chat, I think Christos is going to prepare to do 34 through 38, maybe next time. I know Miyuki and Marvin have not presented yet. So if you would like to present on material in the fourth meditation, please let me know. Otherwise, I'll see you soon. I'm sorry I have to run, but thank you, Olga. It was great.
Thank you very much, Peter.
Thank you all.
You
Thank you all. I must run as well, but thank you for a wonderful. Looking forward to 2 weeks from now. So,
Peter,
Thank you.
need the
Yes.
assignments to post. So maybe you'll take a couple of days to communicate with Miyuki and other participants who want to present, and then send me the summary, please.
Okay. Thank you. I will. All right. Sorry I have to run. Bye-bye, everyone.
Okay. Bye.
Mhm. Okay, well, I'll linger for a little bit because there was no time really for questions. So if there is anything we need to discuss, please feel free. I'll stop the recording now. Let's see. How do I stop the recording? I think